it was an eye-opener. I was actually able to create this beautiful art and to develop a vision and an artistic aesthetic using ICM to create these abstract landscapes. You don't have to go to the far corners and these iconic locations around the world. You can do it right where you are in your own backyard.
Welcome to the Viewfinders Photography Podcast. Graham Dargy here. I'm a photographer based in snowy Aberdeen in Scotland, and my guest today is ICM photographer Stephanie Johnson. We'll meet Stephanie in a minute, but first, how have you been? I hope you're safe and well wherever you are. Me, I'm fresh off hosting my latest Viewfinders Live event with Shona Perkins the other night, and I have to say it was a great success. We had great support from you, the Viewfinders community, the ICM photography community, as well as coverage in Outdoor Photography magazine here in the UK. In the end, we sold way more tickets than we expected, and on the night, people tuned in from all over the world. Every corner of the UK, all over the US, Canada, Mexico, New Zealand, Netherlands and Latvia. And for me, seeing all of those people from all of those places come together around my little podcast, it's just mind-blowing and so gratifying. So thank you to every single person who bought a ticket. Thanks to MPB for sponsoring the event, and of course, thanks to Shona for being the most fantastic guest. So, with that event in the history books, I'm already planning more events, and I'm also trying to think of more ways to serve you, the Viewfinders community, with inspiring content to help you on your photography journey, because that's really what it's all about. So watch this space, and I'll be announcing the next Viewfinders Live event soon. Otherwise, photography-wise, I had a fun test shoot last week where I was trying out some new lighting styles for headshots. I love that kind of stuff, pottering about with lighting and getting people in for this shoot. Really good fun for me, and I learned a thing or two as well, so that was good. And it's the Easter school holidays here, so just busy driving my daughter around and planning a couple of family days away next week, so really looking forward to that. How about you? I'd love to see what you've been getting up to and check out your photography, so you can connect with me on Instagram at Viewfinders Podcast, where you'll get updates about the show. And why not check out the Viewfinders website to find all the previous episodes of the podcast and information about upcoming Viewfinders Live events. Okay, my guest this week is Stephanie Johnson, an ICM photographer based in Iowa in the USA. Stephanie is the founder, creator and publisher of ICM Photography magazine, a first of its kind e-magazine about ICM photography. Stephanie, along with Kaisa, Siren and Morag, Paterson, also run the ICM PhotoMag Network, an online community dedicated to educating and mentoring ICM photographers from around the world. Stephanie's own photography journey is deeply connected to her personal journey, and we talk about her background serving in the US Marine Corps, how she discovered ICM photography, and the impact this has had in her life. I really enjoyed spending this time with Stephanie, who brings a thoughtfulness and playfulness to her photography. If you're into ICM, you're going to relate to a lot of what Stephanie says, and if you're new to ICM photography, then there's just a lot here to learn. So, get the headphones in, relax and enjoy my conversation with Stephanie Johnson. Stephanie Johnson, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Graham?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. You saw me here with my hat on. It's really cold here today.
It's cold here too in Iowa, actually.
Yeah, I was so excited to hear that you're from Iowa because I know that is where Captain Kirk comes from. And as a Star Trek fan, I would be like, whoa, that's so cool. But you don't think it's that cool.
Yeah, no, Riverside. Yep, that's where Captain Kirk is from in the future. And it's actually not too far from where I live.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You have to do a pilgrimage for me.
Okay.
Okay, my Star Trek love comes up frequently on the podcast.
Yeah.
So thank you, Stephanie. I'm so looking forward to this. ICM's been featured on the podcast a couple of times before with Valda Bailey and Shona Perkins, and there's always a really strong response to those episodes. You're a leader in the ICM community, so it's really good to have you on. And for me, as an outsider to ICM, really, I'm here to learn and pick up on some of the whys and hows of ICM photography. But before we dive in, I thought it would be useful for people listening who may not know what we're talking about, what ICM photography is, to just to start by defining what that is. Can you do that? What is ICM photography?
Sure, yeah. ICM stands for intentional camera movement. So at, just a basic level, it's moving the camera during the exposure and it creates kind of an abstract effect with the images. It introduces blur and movement and things like that into the image. So ICM is just really a very artistic and creative kind of photography that's not your traditional, you don't have to follow the same kinds of rules as you do with traditional, say, landscape photography or portrait photography. So that's just kind of a basic overview of what it is, just moving the camera during the exposure.
Okay, and so for your photography, we're really talking about in the context of landscape photography. Would you say that's the right way to say it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've always considered myself to be a landscape photographer. That's what I started out shooting, and so when I made the transition to start shooting ICM photography, I was just naturally drawn to do that in the landscape. But
Mm-hmm.
you can use ICM with any kind of subject. It can be urban, architectural, it can be people, it can be, just even the clutter on your desk. It can be, anything in your home. But for my own personal aesthetic, I do prefer to be out in nature shooting the landscape using ICM.
Great. Okay, so we'll come back to this, but for now, let's go back. You weren't born and brought up in Iowa, as you were saying before. Where did you originate?
I was born and grew up in Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I uh, was in the military, actually. I don't know if a
Wow.
lot of people know that about me because I don't always necessarily talk about it, but I was in the Marines, believe it or not, for 20
Wow.
years on active duty. So I left Dallas and went to the military, and I was stationed, in a number of different places, mostly on the west coast of the United States and overseas in Japan for almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I ended up in Iowa kind of, well, I was married to a Marine. I met and married a Marine who was from Iowa. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we finished our military career, we moved to Iowa to be close to his family. But we
Mm-hmm.
got divorced in 2015, and I've just stayed because my daughter and my son-in-law are pretty much settled here in
Okay.
Iowa City. So,
Okay.
yep.
And so I don't know about military things, but Marines are like, in terms of soldiers, they're kind of tougher soldiers. Is that, am I right to say that?
Yes, the Marine Corps in the United States is kind of the elite branch of service, kind of like the Royal Marines,
Mm-hmm.
I would think. Um, the Marine Corps is quite a bit smaller than the Army, so it's harder to get in.
Okay.
And, the Marines just have this image of being, first to fight and just being a lot more hardcore, like you said,
Okay.
yes, than the
Okay.
other branches of service.
And so are you join the army and then you go to apply to the Marines, or is it a
No,
separate kind
no,
of thing?
you join the Marines. You go straight to the Marines if that's what your choice is. So I made that
Okay.
choice to go to the Marine Corps. Yes.
Okay. And so this is there like a selection process? It must be quite a tough selection process, I imagine.
Well, the scoring, because anytime you join the military in the United States, you have to take what's called an Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test. And it just depends on your scores. So the Marine Corps, you have to have higher scores to even be accepted into the Marine Corps. Your
Okay.
scores have to be higher than they are for any of the other branches of the military. Um, but I had been in ROTC, which or junior ROTC, which is kind of a junior training in high school, where they teach you how to do different things military related. And it was a Marine Corps um, junior ROTC, which stands for Reserve Officer Training Corps.
Okay.
Um, so when I graduated high school, it just was something that I didn't really have any other options. No one ever told me I could go to college, and it wasn't something that my parents were going to pay for. So it was never something that was, and I'm the oldest of three children, so it wasn't ever something that was really on the table for me to go to college. And um, joining the military just seemed like the best option that I had at the time, and it
Hmm.
really turned out to be probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
Okay, so you had a good experience in those years.
Well, I mean, I was a troubled teen growing up also, so it kind of set me on the right path to
Okay.
getting my life together, and giving me direction and helping me learn how to be a responsible adult and things like that. So, it just it who knows where I would have been, if I hadn't
Hmm.
done that. And, I don't dwell on the past. I'm not the kind of person that dwells on the past or things that have happened in the past, but because I do believe that everything that happens for a reason and it makes us who we are. And
Hmm.
so, I wouldn't be the person that I am today if it had not been for those experiences. And I wouldn't have met my spouse, even though we didn't stay married. I wouldn't have my daughter.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
And so, may I ask what kind of role you had? You were saying you're in active service. Does that mean a soldier, or that could be something else?
Well, just as opposed to being a reservist, because if you're a
Okay.
reservist, you only go do it on the weekends once a month.
Okay.
If you're on active duty, that's your full-time job. So that's what you do for, day in, day out. And so I was trained actually to be a heavy equipment mechanic in
Hmm.
the early 1980s. And when I went to my first duty station, they had never had a female mechanic work on the floor turning wrenches in that
Hmm.
particular shop. So the first thing they wanted to do was put me behind a desk doing
Okay.
admin paperwork.
Okay.
So I kind of got pigeonholed into doing admin work most of my
Okay.
career, but I had some wonderful experiences that I never would have had. I worked for some high level general officers over the years that went on to be high profile in the in the United States government. So overall, I mean, it was definitely a good experience, and I got to do a lot of things I never would have gotten to do any
Hmm.
other way.
That's so interesting. Well, I know you said you don't like to dwell on the past. I do. I love it. That's why I'm diving right in here. So, um, but I didn't see that coming. I mean, from the kind of work that I've seen you do, and which is kind of like gentle and it has an emotional kind of quality to it, if you like. If that's maybe not the best word, but and then from that background, I was just surprised to hear that. So, where and when did photography come into the picture then?
Well, I started with the camera in the 1990s while we were stationed in Okinawa and in Japan. And that's kind of really where I picked up the camera and first developed this passion that I wanted to shoot landscapes. I started shooting the sunsets there in Okinawa because, it's a small island in the South China Sea, East China Sea, and you get really brilliant sunsets. And so from there, I got stationed in 29 Palms in California, and it's just outside of Joshua Tree National Park, which is a place that I love. And so I would spend a lot of time going out there and shooting, and visited Death Valley and places in Southern California that just really spoke to me. The landscapes really spoke to me, but I didn't necessarily have the support for the creative work that I wanted to do in my marriage. And so it was never something that I was ever able to really devote a lot of time and attention to. It would just kind of ebb and flow. There would
Mm-hmm.
be times when I could do it, and then other times when I wasn't able to do it. And so it just kind of was that way over the next, well, from the mid 90s until 2015, so about 20 years. It was just kind of this thing. When I retired from the military and we moved to Iowa, one of the ways I tried to get into photography was doing sport photography with my daughter at school. So I just started taking my camera out to shoot her playing basketball or softball. And I was taking pictures of the other kids on the team as well. And parents were liking the images that I was taking, and so I got asked to do a lot of that kind of photography, but that's never been really my passion. And
Mm-hmm.
it also just was something that was I wasn't able to sustain that because of the lack of support I had for doing creative work in
Mm-hmm.
my marriage. And maybe this is all stuff that you don't really need or want to know. I don't mind.
No, it's fine. It's the story. I mean, it's the journey for me that is
Yeah.
interesting, and I think all of those things inform where you're at. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. But I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. It's just difficult time to get or make time for your own pursuits when kids are young, I guess. Plus, just relationship dynamics, it can be tricky, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so you did a lot of sort of traditional landscape photography over those years in and out. And so then when did ICM kind of land in your world?
Well, and so with ICM, it came into my life in about 2017. But what happened was in 2015, I got divorced. I went through a divorce after 24 years of marriage, and it was not something that I asked for. It kind of came unexpectedly and surprisingly. And it was in that process that I decided that it was, time to get back to the core of who I am, because I did feel like, and I agreed, or I allowed it to happen because I believed in the relationship and I believed in the commitment I had made to the relationship, but I had allowed that relationship to stifle my creativity over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I've said that I was not supported in my creative work. And so, it's something that's always been in me, creative work. I grew up playing musical instruments, and I was reading and writing literature at an early age. And my stepfather, who raised me, was an abstract artist, a painter. I was very immersed in the arts growing up as a child, even though it was a troubled time for me as well. But so it's always something that's been in me. And it was in 2015 that it was finally able to be released, I think,
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so in 2015, I was turning 50. I was getting divorced after 24 years of marriage. And my daughter said, "Let's go to Ireland for your 50th birthday." So that's what we did. We traveled to Ireland, and I fell in love with the place.
Mm-hmm.
And over the next 2 years, I returned to Ireland 7 or 8 times. So I was going about every 3 months, 3 or 4 months
Okay,
to
wow.
Ireland just to photograph the landscapes there. And every time I would come back to Iowa and I would think, well, there's nothing here to inspire me. So I
Mm-hmm.
just left the camera in the bag until my next trip to Ireland. And in 2017, um, one of my mentors, Irish mentors, Peter Gordon, he said, you can't just wait until the next time you come back to Ireland to get your camera out of the bag. You've got to find a way to get inspired and do the work where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
At that same time, I also read a book by David Duchemin, who is a Canadian photographer,
Mm-hmm.
called A Beautiful Anarchy, and he says the same thing. You can't wait for inspiration to hit you. You have to get out and do the work. And it's in the doing of the work that inspiration comes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had seen some ICM at that point, but I had never done any. And I thought, okay, let me get my camera out here in Iowa and go out and try that in the Iowa landscape and see if I can turn that into something that appeals to me. And when I started doing it, it was amazing. It was an eye opener, that I was actually able to create this beautiful art and to develop a vision and an artistic aesthetic using ICM to create these abstract landscapes that you
Mm-hmm.
never even would know were Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, that also kind of just inspired me to also encourage other people to say that you don't have to travel, not that travel's a bad thing, but you don't have to go to the far corners and these iconic locations around the world to create beautiful images with your camera. You can do it right where you are in your own backyard, because that's basically what I've done. I've shot more prolifically in the past since 2017 than I ever did when I was shooting, just going to Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just eventually became this thing where I don't even think about shooting a traditional landscape anymore. My
Mm-hmm.
intention every time I go out is to shoot ICM, to create ICM images.
So when you discovered ICM, then I was going to ask how the transition was for you, but it sounded like it came to you quite willingly. I was always curious about people shedding rules and if that is a hard process because there can be a lot of rules around photography. Don't know if you were just ready for that with the stage that you were at in life, maybe. Was there a transition there, or did it just land in your lap like that, where you're like, okay, I get this?
No, I think it was an easy transition because of a number of different things. For one, I had also been at that particular time doing a very deep spiritual dive,
Mm-hmm.
and getting to know who I am at the core of me. And so it kind of all came together at the same time. And in a way that ICM also actually helped me connect to that spiritual world in a more meaningful way because I'm not looking, when we're doing traditional photography, we're looking at a landscape or we're looking at an urban scene or people or whatever in a very literal way. We're seeing with our physical eyes the literal landscape or the literal lines of a subject. And ICM, it removes all of that,
Mm-hmm.
in a way, in kind of the same way that happens when you start looking inward. You stop seeing maybe the separation of things. When you start looking inward, you start to see the connection between
Right.
all things instead of the separation. And when we're looking with our physical eyes, a lot of times we are seeing things as separate, that thing in the distance is separate from that thing in the distance. But with
Mm-hmm.
ICM, it all becomes one,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how I feel on a spiritual level as well. And so from that perspective, I think it all came together, it all just really came together in the way that it needed to, I think. And then even though I had lived this very regimented lifestyle, having been in the military and then also working for the federal government for a number of years after my military service, I had that artistic part of me that had been laying dormant for so long or had been stifled for so long, that I think it was just time and ready to come out. And so even though I was in the military and I lived a regimented lifestyle, I also do not necessarily always think following the rules is
Mm-hmm.
necessarily something that we have to do no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the military, there are times I think when not following the rules can save lives,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
so I've never been really stuck on this idea that we have to follow certain rules. So, yeah,
Okay.
and ICM definitely allows you to break free of all of that,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
That was the sort of philosophical side of things. Maybe let's look at some of the sort of practicalities and the process of doing it. I'm always interested with landscape photographers. I'm throwing you in that bucket now, but of landscape photography. But when you get to a location, what then? Where's the starter point? What do you start to look for? Because for me, as shooting as a traditional landscape photographer, I'm like, okay, there's going to be a focal point probably over there. It might be a lighthouse or something, mountain. And now I'm looking for something in the foreground, and then I'll look for separation, and then we'll just try and figure it out and put it together, and I'll move around. And I have my own way of doing that
Hmm.
with the kind of photography you're doing, where it's not that, isn't it? So what's the starter point when you go out to shoot ICM?
I guess I would say the starting point for me is just to get out there and to be in nature. And once I'm out there, I start to see things that catch my attention. So if I'm out with my camera and I'm just walking on a trail or something and I come around a bend, I might see the way the light is hitting a particular tree in a way that just really hits me.
Mm-hmm.
I've been out before where I'm walking on a path and I come around a corner and there's some trees with vines growing up the side of the trees, and the light is coming through breaks in the tree tops to hit those vines in such a way that the green of the leaves look really illuminated against the darker backdrop of the tree behind the bark of the tree behind it. And so it's things like that, it's just little things like that that are catching my attention when I'm out there, and then I think, oh, I've got to try to work with that, or I want to see what I can do with that to create
Mm-hmm.
something unique or different with my images. um, and I think ICM has helped me learn how to see the light in a much different way than it did when I was doing traditional landscape photography. It's helped me to notice small details, whereas when you're doing grand scale landscape photography, a lot of times your attention doesn't go to those small details
Mm-hmm.
in quite the same way. And so, I really have always felt like ICM photography opened me up to a lot of things that I never would have really noticed, I don't think, or I might not ever have really developed an eye for if I had continued just primarily shooting traditional grand scale landscape images. So for me, when I go out to be out in nature, but then I also go out a lot of times specifically to shoot a sunset. And so, there are several locations around a lake where I live that I do shoot sunsets a lot. And I go to these different locations at different times of the year. So those are things I'm thinking about is where is the sun going to set at any particular given point of the year so that I know which location to go to, uh, so that it will be in the right spot for what I want to capture with that. Um, so I don't know. Did I get off track of the question? Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And so, do you know when do you start to know like what you're trying to achieve? If I'm going to a location, like a landscape location, like the kind you get here, you kind of know what the shot is or where you might start. You get that in the bag, then you might look for something else. But because it's so abstract, when does in the process do you start to think, oh, this is what it might be, or can you know what it is, or is it like a finding process?
I think it is kind of a finding process each time you go out. So, I go to the same locations over and over and over and over again. And I'm always looking for different ways to capture that scene in a different way because, if I'm going to that place, and with ICM, there is a lot of, no two images are exactly the same. Some of them might look the same, but, but they're not all exactly the same. And so, different types of movements, different types of settings will create different effects, different speeds of movements will create different effects. So, I'm always looking to try to push the images that I'm creating in a new way. After I've
Mm-hmm.
shot a particular scene hundreds or thousands of times, then I'm always looking to move the camera differently to try to create something different that I haven't done or I haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it is a little bit of a finding process. And even sometimes you wouldn't really maybe necessarily think of it this way, but I could go to the exact same location for a sunset and shoot today the sunset, and then tomorrow there's going to be a completely different kind of weather condition, and the same movements I used to shoot that scene the day before might not really work with those weather conditions that I'm shooting the
Mm-hmm.
next day. And so,
Mm-hmm.
you just have to see how the light is playing on the camera. You have to kind of play around with it, for me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go out, I shoot typically 300 to 500 images on any given outing.
Mm-hmm.
And because part of it is that I am trying different things, but part of it too is that I just get in this flow of moving with the camera and moving in nature, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
it's all part of the creative process for me. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm more process driven than I am results driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I don't pre-visualize
Okay.
necessarily, really, in the way that I think a lot of people might. I just go out and start playing and seeing
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. And if I like what I'm seeing, then I just make adjustments, or I try to replicate, or I try something new to see if I can push the boundaries a little bit farther to do something new and different and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an element of play. I really think with ICM there needs to be an, a, an element of play
Mm-hmm.
involved in it.
Okay. In your process, then, you mentioned flow. I wasn't sure if you meant like you actually go into flow where you're just kind of zoned out of everything else and you're just doing that activity. And I was curious to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier. If there's that sort of spiritual, connected to nature aspect of it come in that in the process as well somewhere, does all of that sort of join together at some point when you achieve that kind of flow state? Am I understanding that?
Yeah, no, I think that's very much the case because, when you're being mindful, you're not thinking of anything else. You're
Mm-hmm.
just present in the moment. And so for me, when I get into that flow, that's what it's all about. I'm just moving the camera and I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm looking and I'm noticing what's happening on the back of the camera. And if I see something I like, then it brings me back to that, okay, what am I doing with my movements or my technique? But for the most part, it is being present in the moment and just being a part of what's going on right then and there, and not thinking about, you know, is this image, or it's not thinking about as I'm seeing the images on the back of the camera, it's not thinking about, oh, how's anybody going to react to that? You know,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of times with even traditional photography, you could be out there and you can capture something and you can think, oh my goodness, everybody's just going to love that. You know, I don't shoot for anybody else. I don't
Mm-hmm.
create for anybody else. I create for myself. And so there is none, when I'm in the flow, there is none of that external thinking about what anybody else is going to think. If it's
Mm-hmm.
making me happy and you know I'm enjoying the process, then that's the most important part. And honestly, you know, like I said, I can shoot 300 to 500 images in any given outing, and I may not look at those images until a week or 2 weeks or a month later,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of it to me is just that's part of the creative process. I get as much satisfaction in that part of the process as I do post processing an image and sharing it on social media. So,
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's
yeah.
so interesting. So that's it. When I shoot landscape photography, when I have in that spell of my career that I'm not in any longer, it very much was for work, and I was out there to get something. No doubt, I was out there to take something, to capture something, and I was like hunting kind of thing.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that word hunting and take and capture because we
Mm-hmm.
do use those terms to
Mm-hmm.
talk about our photography. And those are really, I try not to use them
Mm-hmm.
because it does seem like a very aggressive
Mm-hmm.
uh, process or aspect of photography when you start thinking about taking images and capturing images and hunting for the scene or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And you know, it's not about that kind of aggression. It's
Mm-hmm.
about just being connected and being a
Mm-hmm.
part of and creating, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and being part of that creative flow and energy that is the universe,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I
Yeah.
just sorry interrupted you, but I just thought it was interesting that you said that because I did read something recently that said that, you know, we do use a lot of those kinds of terminology that are very aggressive terms.
Yeah, I was gonna say I had Paul Sanders on. I don't know if you know Paul Sanders.
Mhm.
He's an English photographer and landscape guy. He said that he was saying, yeah, we use words like take, capture, but he said I don't take photographs, I receive them, and I just thought it was brilliant. Like it was like a game changer for me. Like, but you can understand that, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Mhm.
because that creative energy from the universe is working through you. It's,
Mhm.
you know, it's coming through you and out of you, and it's not something that you're necessarily doing yourself. You're not and if you're thinking of it in those terms, then you probably just have a different view on the world
Mhm.
anyway. I
Mhm.
think if you're thinking, but it is also ingrained in us because
Mhm.
it, you know, that is what we have always grown up and been taught to think of with photography is that we're taking and we're capturing, but you know, capturing is a very negative way of
Yeah.
thinking about something because you can capture, you know, animals or people
Mhm.
in a very negative way or so, you know, thinking in those terms is almost like you're taking away from trying to take something away from the universe or take something away from the environment rather than
Mhm.
give it back or give back or just be a part of it.
ICM is one of those things that is a little bit of a niche, but it has a really dedicated following and people who really get it and who are really into it. And I wanted to ask you about the community that you've built around ICM photography. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how it came about and what you're doing community-wise around your photography.
Yeah, so for a long time I've wanted to build a community around creative photography, abstract photography, and ICM photography. And I started trying to do that probably even a year or 2 years before I created the magazine. but different things were going on in my life that kind of prevented me from being able to move all of that forward. And then in 2020, I don't know if you're familiar with Derek Mikulski.
No.
He's a Polish photographer that lives in England, and he was producing a magazine called Long Exposure Photography Magazine, and he had a Facebook group called LE Mag group. Um, and he had started that in 2018, and it was kind of something that I had been thinking about as well, but like I said, I didn't get to move it forward. Well, and then 2020, he asked me if I would be interested in having a column, a regular ICM section in his monthly digital magazine. Um, and I said, yeah, sure, no problem. So I did that for a couple of months and I thought, you know what? I think there's potential to just build a magazine solely dedicated to ICM. And this is something I've thought about for a long time anyway. So I'm just going to do it. I'm going to step out there and put faith in the universe that it's all going to work out. And so that's kind of how that came about. And I asked him, and I told him I want to base this kind of similarly on what you've been doing with your Facebook group and your magazine, because he, built the following for the magazine on through the group. Um, and so he was didn't have a problem with that at all. And so that's kind of how that launched. And I just reached out to about 10 or 12 photographers that I either knew personally as ICM photographers or I was familiar with their work. And then to fill the extra spots that I still had or wanted, I just started looking for some photographers that I liked their work, that their work resonated with me. And so that was the first issue basically, was just
Hmm.
featuring these 12 photographers. And then it's just kind of blossomed from there. The Facebook group has grown exponentially. The magazine is still going strong. I've been collaborating with a couple of other ladies who do ICM, Morag Paterson from Scotland
Hmm.
and Kaisa Siren in Finland. And we do workshops and we have a private membership community built all on ICM photography. So, it, the three of us really do have this passion for celebrating the art and the beauty of ICM photography, but not just that, but also to give other people of a place to express themselves,
Hmm.
creatively, and to nurture that and encourage it and to inspire them, um, not just to physically think about taking ICM photos, but to make those deeper connections with their spirituality or with the environment, or to make connections with art or literature, because everything is so connected. And with art can speak very profoundly to so many things. And I just personally want to encourage people to be looking for those ways to use their ICM to create not just beautiful abstract images, but to make those kinds of connections outside of the images, or to bring those connections to their imagery that they're making, if that makes sense. But it's been a blessing for me because I've gotten to meet and interact with so many people that I never would have
Hmm.
had the opportunity, to have been in contact with. And especially because of COVID, I think COVID has made it easier to do things like this online,
Hmm.
because now we are living in this kind of a world where our relationships in a lot of cases are virtual, as opposed to being in person. I could never have had this relationship with Kaisa and Morag if it weren't for technology. And COVID has kind of driven that, I
Mm-hmm.
think, in a lot of ways that we
Mm-hmm.
didn't necessarily foresee before COVID.
I really admire the community that you've built around what you're doing. And yeah, it seems like a great place for someone who's curious about this to start with ICM photography. Your community in the magazine seems like a great place where they could start. So I'll put the links in the show notes for that, where people can find you. And yeah, they can take it from there. Let's go in a different direction and quickly talk about camera gear. I don't know how important gear, lenses, and things are in this kind of photography. I don't know, but what would you reach for in your camera bag, camera and lens?
Well, for me, I work with a Canon 5D Mark III, and my go-to lens is my f4L series 70 to 200 millimeter lens. That's
Okay.
what I typically always shoot with. But with ICM, you don't have to have um, I mean, there's a whole movement with mobile ICM,
Okay.
iPhone ICM going on right now. And if you know Andy Gray, who is an ICM photographer in Northumberland,
Okay.
he's got a very big following. He does weekly live stream YouTube videos where he goes through his whole process of creating his post processing his post processing, and people always reference Andy Gray's work when you're talking about ICM photography. I think he's one of the people that's really kind of helped put it on the map.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he has a very intricate post processing workflow.
Mm-hmm.
It requires a lot of time and attention and detail. I don't personally work that way. I
Mm-hmm.
like to do as much as I can in camera, and I don't spend a lot of time post processing. But the point I was trying to get to was that for the longest time, Andy shot with a lower end Nikon
Mm-hmm.
camera. Uh, and so that only had maybe, I think he's maybe said it only was like 12 megapixels.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's up to, I don't know the Nikon brands because I'm a Canon. I'm not sure what the higher level Nikon camera is, but he did in the last year or so invest in one of the higher end Nikons that has, the 25 megapixels. Um, but yeah, I mean, you don't have to have a lot of expensive gear to do ICM.
Mm-hmm.
And if I hadn't already had a 5D Mark III and the L series lenses, which are Canon's best lenses, um, for the landscape work that I was doing, I might not have ever invested in that
Mm-hmm.
for the ICM. I don't know. But because I've worked with it now for so long, I'm used to it. And there is a difference. So I also have a Canon 7D and other lenses. And when I try to shoot ICM with my 7D, it requires me to move and think a little bit differently than when I'm
Mm-hmm.
working with my 5D. And I don't do it with my mobile phone at all, but I'm sure that there's a whole nother learning curve to try to figure out how to move the camera,
Yeah.
with a mobile phone, mobile device. So, there are intricacies that are um, specific to the types of camera that you're going to use. But
Mm-hmm.
once you start working with it, you just develop muscle memory, I
Mm-hmm.
think, and so um, it just becomes a natural thing.
And then, do you use filters? Do you use like an ND filter or anything like that?
I have a, I do have a three-stop ND, just screw-on one.
Mm-hmm.
When I was doing my landscape photography work, I had the whole Lee filter kit
Mm-hmm.
system that I used. And when I started doing ICMs, I did not use filters at all for the
Okay.
longest time because, I could shoot in the middle of the day a lot of times, especially in a woodland area with my long lens, my 70 to 200, and I can go up to f32 anyway. So I don't necessarily need that filter because I can stop down to f32, which, as a landscape photographer, anybody in their right mind as a landscape photographer would probably never use f32
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
shoot traditional landscapes.
Yeah.
But that's the thing with ICM. You can do that, and it's no problem.
And then I try not to talk about apertures and shutter speeds, but if you were, where would you like to be at for a shutter speed for the type of movements that you do?
For me, for the longest time I shot at 1/13th of a second.
Okay.
That
That
was
just was your magic number.
that was my magic number for probably, I don't know, the first 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And over the past couple of years, I've been dialing it back a little bit to go a little bit longer. So I'm at probably about a half a second, which isn't a huge amount.
Yeah, it's
From 1/13th to 1/2 of a second isn't a huge amount, but it does make a difference. Now when I try to shoot at 1/13th of a second after I'm used to shooting at 1/2 of a second, it's like, oh man, I got to move way faster than I do at a half a second.
yeah.
But the beauty with ICM is that you can shoot at any shutter speed, 5 seconds if you want to. You can hold the camera still, move, hold the camera still, move. There's just a lot of play and experimentation that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because to find what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you, but then even just stepping outside of what is working for you to experiment with something different is going to open up a whole nother door of
Yeah.
creativity for you.
I can imagine it's sort of endless. I really thought it would be a longer shutter speed. I was thinking like 13th particularly, like that's really not a slow shutter speed. But yeah, like you say, there's no boundaries on that really. And then processing, you're not you have a light touch with processing. I think you said so. Just Lightroom and Photoshop kind of thing, or
Yeah, I do all of my main edits in Lightroom, and I'm just basically making adjustments to exposure, highlights, shadows. A lot of times, especially when I'm shooting sunsets, I'm shooting directly at the sun or where the sun is setting. So I will a lot of times bring the highlights way down, and I'll bring up the shadows quite a bit.
mm-hmm.
Um, the other thing that I do, oh, sometimes I change the temperature. It just, if the raw file, because I shoot in RAW, I don't
Mm-hmm.
shoot in JPEG, I shoot in RAW, and if I was shooting a sunset and it was kind of maybe the raw file might come back looking a little grayish,
Mm-hmm.
I might adjust the temperature in Lightroom to make it more blue, to give it more blue so that it looks, more like what I was seeing when I was out there. But just minor things like that. I'm not making huge adjustments. I'm not adding something that wasn't there or taking away anything. And then I export to Photoshop and I do my spot removal
Mm-hmm.
in Photoshop. I find the spot healing brush tool in Photoshop much easier to use than the spot removal tool in Lightroom.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
much much easier, isn't it? Okay, so for someone who wanted to who's hearing this, maybe wanted to give this a try, you don't need fancy gear. You don't need to have a long back end process. You can really just have a shot, really, even as much as with your phone, but with any SLR camera for sure. So that's really encouraging. I hope people want to give this a try. This is a round called double exposure, okay? Where I'm going to ask you about a picture of yours that I really like and for the story behind it. And then I'll
Okay.
ask you if you're okay to share one that you particularly have a good story to go with from your photography journey. So there's so many pictures that on your in your portfolio that just look cool to me. But
Oh, thank
ones
you.
that I've chosen, maybe because I can just relate to them, are a couple with trees in them, and there's from your website called Evening Shade and Evening Light. They're just next or above and below each other. Do you know the ones I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. And actually, those two images are early on in my ICM work. they're the same set of trees,
Mm-hmm.
just, one is in probably early summer and the other is in fall, when the grass is no longer green. And so the two images, evening shade, I was shooting the scene where the sun was behind the trees.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in front of me, and then so that's where you see that yellow. That yellow is kind of the background behind the trees that's a little bit more open,
Mm-hmm.
and the light is creating an effect that kind of makes the greens look a little yellow, but then you've got the trees that are in the shade, and so that's why I call it evening shade.
Mm-hmm.
And then the evening light is actually on the back side of those trees
Mm-hmm.
with the light behind me
Okay.
shining. So they're the light is behind me and I'm shooting them from a different angle. And those trees are actually very special to me because, those trees are really where I got started with my ICM.
Okay.
Both of those images are early images, and I used to walk with my dog on this path that we would go by those trees, and I would just take my camera with me, and I would always stop and shoot them, and I would just shoot, 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 shoot. Um, and so I must have shot those trees, I don't know, thousands of times,
Mm-hmm.
but those two particular, and especially Evening Shade, is probably one of my most liked images, even still,
Okay.
of by other people, and it is one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, they're it's just so they're lovely images. I mean,
Oh, thank
yeah,
you.
it's great. I wondered if there's a moment or a picture or just an anecdote from your photography journey that is a particularly memorable moment or something you would like to share.
Um, well, I can't necessarily think of anything other than we were just talking about my dog, and he was such a big part of my creative journey. Um, he passed away 3 years ago.
Mm.
Um, I think I mean, I gave you the reason why I got into ICM because of my travels to Ireland and not being able to find any inspiration in the Iowa landscapes. But then it was also because of him, because we would go out and walk on these trails in the woods in so many different locations. I would just take him all over the place, and every time we would go out, I would take my camera with me. I just started to, always capture the scenes while we were walking using ICM. So that was kind of a big part of it, um, for me as well. And a lot of my early work was trees because we did spend a lot of time walking in woodland areas on trails and things like that. So trees are very special to me and something that I do have a real connection with. And in fact, I've started reading some books on forest bathing because I want to, you know, I think I've probably been doing forest bathing,
Mm-hmm.
just not necessarily having that title or that terminology
Yeah.
associated with it. So I'm finding it interesting that a lot of, people are getting interested in forest bathing because of the healing nature of being in the woodlands and absorbing and becoming part of that, becoming connected to that whole ecosystem in the forest, in that way. That's something that ICM has always helped me do. And a lot of it was because I think I was going out with my dog,
Mm-hmm.
just to be out in nature with him and taking my camera along the way.
Mm-hmm. There's nowhere like a forest. I mean, there's such a special atmosphere in forests, isn't there? Okay, let's bring it home. It's the final round, the quick fire round called Motor Drive.
Okay.
And here goes. Okay, wide angle or telephoto?
Telephoto.
For sure. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Oh, okay. Got a particular kind of tea that you're into, or?
I kind of make my own blend of herbal and green, so it's half, kind of half and half herbal, hibiscus and half green tea,
Okay.
and some dried berries that go in that. But I did drink coffee for a long time, and then I stopped drinking coffee about 2.5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I've just had tea ever since.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
been tea.
yeah, I don't see you as a caffeinated type
Yeah.
actually from what we said, but um, so stay up late or wake up early?
Stay up late.
Okay, I'd like to be a wake up early. Sometimes I am in the summer, but usually,
Yeah.
like today, I was like I should have stayed up late to work last night because I didn't get up early today. Anyway, because when I'm awake, I'm already awake. I don't have to wake up again. Anyway,
Oh yeah.
so a little bit about me. Okay, expensive lens cloth or the corner of your shirt?
Lens cloth.
Oh, right. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a favorite emoji?
I don't know. I mean, I use the heart emoji. I use the prayer,
Mm-hmm.
thankful emoji a lot,
Yeah.
and I use the smiley face emoji a lot. But if I'm joking around, I use the one that's not crying, but tears, but kind of
It's like,
turned sideways a
okay.
little bit. I don't know what that one is,
It's
but
like
I don't
crying
know what
with
they're called.
laughter, but
Yeah,
on the side.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting. It's a whole language, you know. Um,
Yeah.
what's your favorite band from your state? You can choose Iowa or Texas, whichever state you like.
Well, I don't know that I necessarily have a favorite, but I'll tell you an interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably don't even know who this group is, Pantera.
Maybe.
It's
Is it like an
heavy metal,
80s kind of?
80s.
Yeah.
I went to high school with those guys.
Oh, no way.
So if you look up Pantera, Daryl and Daryl and Vince, they're the guys that created that band Pantera.
Okay.
I was in high school and band actually with those guys in Texas.
Oh, you were in the band, like the school band.
Hmm.
Okay, okay. I
Yeah.
thought for a second you were in Pantera, but anyway.
No, 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 I wasn't in Pantera, but we were all in the school band and we played, together. So, but they went on to
Mm-hmm.
build this mega empire around this heavy metal band called Pantera.
So were they obviously good musicians, or they just had something
Well,
special?
they were very well. No, they were good musicians, and I mean Vince or Daryl, excuse me, the guitar player. Um, he was often kind of compared to Eddie Van Halen.
Okay, right. Wow.
So yeah,
Okay,
he was
it's
good.
interesting. Oh, good one.
Yeah,
Okay, what's a weird thing I can find in your camera bag?
I keep bandanas in my camera bag, but I mean they're called bandanas or handkerchiefs,
Mm-hmm.
and I use them as handkerchiefs to blow my nose
Ah, okay.
when I'm out. Because if it's cold out, your nose is always runny, and so I always have a handkerchief or a bandana that I use to blow my nose when I'm out,
Mm-hmm.
and I keep those in my camera bag.
Cool. Okay, everybody's got something. Name a photographer we should all know. A hero, a mentor, someone that you look up to.
Well, I guess I would say that the two that are my heroes and that I look up to are the two ladies that I collaborate with,
Mm-hmm.
Kaisa Siren from Finland and Morag Paterson from Scotland, um, because we work so well together, and not that's not why they're my heroes, but we do work so well together. We've developed this really special bond, I think, through the collaboration that we've had. And they both are just amazing photographers themselves. They both are very giving, very supportive, encouraging. Their ethos is the same as mine, I think, in that they want to give more than take,
Mm-hmm.
and it's always about what you can do for other people more than what you get out of it,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's just really special because I don't know that you find that a lot these days. And
Yeah,
so
it's
it's always,
refreshing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's around. I think there's a lot of people, but maybe because of the nature of that, they're not seeking a spotlight or anything like that. So maybe they go unheralded, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe.
I have to say, people, I mean, most people I've approached to do the podcast, I don't know them, they don't know me. So it's amazing how giving people can be. I've been surprised by it because I'm just emailing people out of the blue. They literally have never heard of me. And some of the people that you think, should I bother because this person's like, top of their field, and those are the ones who are the most generous. It's amazing, really. It can't be a coincidence.
Yeah.
And the last question I always have: when do you feel at peace with the universe?
I feel at peace, most at peace with the universe when I am in nature, um, just having quiet time, just being. I went out actually on Monday. It was one of the rare days that I had for a long time to just go out and do something for myself. And that's what I did. I just went out to be rather than do anything, and just spend time in nature. And I don't even have to, especially when I don't take my camera, and I just go out and spend time in nature, just being. I think that's the time that I do feel the most connected, because you can just be and you're not doing anything.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you so much. It's so thought-provoking, so interesting. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you. I appreciate you asking me. It's a wonderful opportunity to share, and also, to get to know you a little bit as well. And I just really appreciate the time that you've given me to talk about ICM photography, because it is my passion, and I do love to share it.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening. Follow Stephanie on Instagram and check out the ICM photo community and magazine that she's built. Links are in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out my conversations with Valda Bailey and Shona Perkins, both ICM abstract photographers. Take care, enjoy your photography, and I'll see you out there.